Surely, I told that I'm just going to put the keys, my keys next to you.
You ready, Shirley? Ooh, do we have a computer to mute? All right. All right, I'll bring the October 25th, 2022 Board of Education Studies session to order. Roll call.
Kate Thomas,
Here.
Troy Carr,
Here.
Deb Carr is absent with notice. Jim Hansen,
Here.
Clay Colomb is absent with notice. Jamie Clapham,
Here.
Michael Berkland.
Here.
All right, stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for one nation under God, indivisible, liberty, and justice. Okay, I need a motion for approval.
So moved.
I'll second. Okay. Roll call.
Jamie or Kate,
Yes.
Troy,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
and Michael.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right, we are on for items for discussion, and I believe Shane is up and Coy is on Zoom. For
you, Madam President.
cybersecurity.
Yes, thank you. All right, so let me get the slideshow going here. Thank you. So the purpose of tonight is to talk about some different topics related to cybersecurity. We're going to go over some typical tactics and some statistics with cyber criminal activity, why our K-12 school districts are being increasingly targeted, some of the current practices that we're currently doing in the school district and have been for a while to help protect ourselves, and then what some of the next steps that we need to look at. So in a nutshell, the goals of a cyber criminal, really, they want to obtain access to your data, and that's for purposes of identity theft or to sell it to others. They also want to try to deny access to your data for ransomware purposes. And then they also want to break into systems so they can use other organizations, computing power, networking to create mischief in other areas. So that's a simplification of the major areas that the cyber criminals are looking to do. Some of the common tactics that we see all the time are social engineering, which is basically trying to trick somebody into revealing, your credentials to somebody else. They'll pretend they're the superintendent or a finance person, or it's your bank. So that's like the number one piece right now that we're looking at. Also malware, people try to get malware and install that on other computers, and then you can take over your computer and get access to their credentials, that type of thing. And then also the distributed denial of service, which basically that's a process where multiple millions and millions of packets of information are just designed just to flood your network or flood a server to where it basically makes it's useless and non-functioning. So I have a few statistics that I pulled from a website. So 1 in 3 home computers probably have malware on them, because most people don't even think about it. They get their computer and they use it. 65% of Americans, when they go online, they receive at least one scam offer per year, if not more. From the dollars perspective, worldwide, it's the cyber criminals cost $358 per year and 20 hours of lost time. 47% of American adults have had their personal information exposed by cyber criminals. So that's pretty crazy when you think about it. Every single day, there's 600,000 various accounts that are hacked, and it's not just Facebook. It's just accounts in general. And then the number one cybercrime is like the imposter piece, where they pretend to be somebody else so they can get your credentials or get your banking information. Why K-12 is such a target? So we have all of the information that any company has, because we're a pretty large organization, employee data, financial data. And then we also have student data, and every year we have new students coming in, and there's tons of personal information for that. Some of the challenges that we have as K-12 and a lot of organizations, we're on multiple platforms. We have hundreds of applications. There's cell phones, we have tablets, and the insider threats, we have some students that might want to push the envelope sometimes. And then also there's a potential for employees. That's typical in organizations. Change management is pretty tough for K-12, just because anytime when we try to implement something, you need to take time to do it. And as you know, there's not a lot of time for our staff throughout the year for things above and beyond, just teaching kids. So we have a large amount of network traffic. We have 20,000 plus devices accessing the network, and we don't have resources that are just dedicated just to cybersecurity and nothing else. So, and that is pretty typical in a lot of organizations, not just us. So currently what we do, and we've been doing for a while, is we do annual cybersecurity training. Recently we changed over to require multi-factor authentication for any employee that has a district cell phone. And that works out nicely because most employees that have that kind of access have elevated access to our data. We require strong passwords, which is a 12-character password. We make sure our systems are patched and up to date. And we also are pretty methodical about who has access to what, with systems based on their role, mainly skyward. Like a building principal will see stuff just for their school. A teacher will just see information just for their classroom, that kind of thing. So some of the next steps we're going to look at in more detail is really forming like a data governance group. And that's to get really more specific and in the detail about what we do with our data, where it's stored, how we dispose of it, inventory what data we have. We have millions of files out in Office 365 and G Suite. I'd like to go back through Skyward and see who has access to what data, see if we can't limit that more based on role. And then also, third-party organizations that have access to our data as well. And then I touched on this a little bit, is to review our retention and destruction procedures and policies, because that hasn't been looked at for a few years. So some of the additional items, the state came in, they performed an annual risk assessment with us a few months ago, and they came up with a few things, and we're responding to that. Coy and I have talked about this, about coming up with some enhanced training for staff based on their roles, because once a year is pretty hard to get everybody thinking about that. So maybe accounting folks, HR folks, maybe teachers do small trainings throughout the year that take maybe 10 or 15 minutes just to keep reminding them of what to look for different things. Vendor management, that's a piece that we haven't done a lot with yet, but requiring vendors to notify us if they are compromised, so we know to put a hold on something that's coming from them. We want to look at multi-factor authentication for some other staff too that I know don't have district cell phones, but can see quite a bit of data. Like your clerical people, that kind of thing. And then also, we need to have some conversations with our existing vendors about what they do when they have an incident, just to make sure, we are protected also, because our student data is housed at a third party offsite, just to go through that and what that looks like, so we know. And now I'm going to turn over to Coy, and I'm going to drive. So Mr. Sassy, this is all you now. So.
Well, thank you, Mr. Daniels. Great job, Shane. Thank you for the really thorough update. Good evening, board. Excuse me. I was hoping to be there in person with you, but I've been a little under the weather today. So as always, appreciate the opportunity to be there. virtually so that we can make sure we update you on this really important topic. So Shane did a great job, gave you some pretty thorough information. I don't want to be redundant, but I do think that there are a few pieces from the financial aspect of this regarding how we view and how we address cybersecurity that I would like to chat a little more in depth with, with the board on. Cybersecurity is a really important issue. There has been just a dramatic increase in cybersecurity crime over the past decade, and really especially in the last 3 years. And somehow that was in some way exacerbated by COVID. And there's just been a real dramatic uptick in cases of cybercrime. You heard Shane talk a little bit about the idea that schools have really increasingly become targets because of that massive amount of really sensitive data that we are in control of. And when you talk with some industry experts, schools were sort of this hidden gem to a lot of fraudsters and cyber criminals because, you think of a school, you think of, well, they have information, but probably not information that would seem appealing. And in reality, we have a huge amount of information that is very appealing to cyber criminals. So we have increasingly become targets of that type of crime. And obviously, cybersecurity has really deep financial ramifications to the district, both in terms of a cybercrime incident and in terms of how we protect the district against cybercrime and where we invest our resources. And that'll be a little bit more of what we'll talk about. Can you flip for me, Shane, please, sir? So I want to talk a little bit about layers of defense. I think that as you discuss cybersecurity, what becomes really important is building layers of defense in your system to protect against cybercrime. I think of it as a couple different things. One, I think of it as what we call like hard defense, and these are system implemented defenses. Those are things like multi-factor authentication, password control systems, and other security systems that are built into the hardware and software of the technology of the district. On the flip side of that, I think of the other side being what I would call a soft defense. And that would really be defense that relies on the training and knowledge of the personnel within the system. Many cyber threats, as a matter of fact, probably the majority of cyber threats still are schemes that are relying on human error in one way or another. So phishing, for example, is relying on human error, that the signs and the red flags are not going to be picked up, and someone is accidentally going to, or mistakenly, I should say, click on something that they shouldn't, and a fraudster or a cyber criminal will gain access to our system or information in our system. So when we think about the great need for not only training and knowledge of our personnel, but also building in internal control processes and procedures that can help our employees defend against those threats, that is really, really an important part of layering that defense. As you heard Shane talk about, another layer of that defense would really be the partners that the district is working with. These would include vendors, insurance companies, banking institutions, state and federal agencies that the district interacts with and relies on, both for data transmission and partnering and defending against these cyber attacks. And all of these layers need to be working together cohesively to effectively deter cybercrime. And you heard Shane give an example, and I think it's a really fantastic example that vendors to the district should be expected, if not required, to alert the district if they have been compromised. Obviously, that can be a situation in which we can really easily identify a threat and head something off before it happens. If a vendor is coming to us and saying, hey, by the way, we've been compromised, or we are aware that we are being impersonated, any of those things that we can get a heads up on and have knowledge about beforehand, we can more effectively deter on the back end. So I just think it's really important to think of protecting the district against cybercrime as layering our defense systems on top of each other to provide the greatest amount of protection that we can. Okay, Shane. One of the really hot issues right now is in regard to insurance and insurance policy issues related to cybersecurity. As I have conversations with our property and liability insurance folks, they talk about the idea that because of this really rampant increase in cybercrime, insurance companies are changing the way that they provide coverage for cybersecurity. Make no mistake, those companies are in the business to turn a profit. And right now, because of this out of control increase that they are seeing, and because of a lot of other issues that all play into the cybersecurity landscape, they are oftentimes not seeing a profit. And so they are adjusting and they are changing the way that they provide that coverage. So that means things like increasing cybersecurity policy premiums, increasing deductibles, decreasing coverage limits, decreasing the robustness of the type of cybercrime events that are included in a insurance policy. And that's really important. Those are things that can very heavily financially impact the district and really make a big difference in what the overall cybersecurity landscape looks like. So as a district moves into the future, we need to be really critical about how we approach cybersecurity and determine ultimately if it's worth the investment, or could those resources be better invested in defense, i.e., defense systems, training, assessments. We have to be very critical about how we look at that picture and how we can best invest district resources to protect against cybercrime. Okay, Shane. So in closing, I think cybersecurity is not the responsibility of one department. It is not just Shane's responsibility because it's considered a tech thing, right, Shane? It's really the responsibility of all the stakeholders of the district. It will take resources to address cybersecurity issues, defense systems, training, insurance, assessments, all those good things that Shane talked about. Those all require an investment. And when we think about the return on investment that we want to see, we have to really keep in mind the major damage that can be done both financially and to the reputation and trust of the district with its shareholders from a cybersecurity attack. So this is a crucial issue, I think, as we move into the future. And Shane has a great handle on this. Shane and I have had an opportunity to have multiple conversations. I think that we are on the same page. And so as we discuss more about cybersecurity measures and protection, and we bring those items to you, I feel good about the page we are on, in that we're headed in the same direction. So President Thomas, with that, I will stop, and I'm sure that Shane can answer any questions you have.
So who's got questions? I'm checking for him.
I do, President Thomas.
Okay, go ahead, Bishop Carr.
Shane, this question is for you. I have two questions. The first question, you mentioned that we recently had an assessment, and obviously, as we talk about security, the results of that assessment shouldn't be talked about on this platform. But is there any way that we can get whatever copy or format or whatever the results of that assessment, the good and the bad, and then what we are doing to take corrective actions?
Yep, I can certainly send that out to everybody.
Okay. And then my second question is, as students bring their computers from home to school, what protection is in place so that if they're at home and the security is not that great, that they don't pick up something at home and then it ends up in the school's system?
So we use a product from Cisco called Cisco Umbrella, and that is on always, whether their computer is here in the network or home or at home. You know, and so also when they bring I'm talking about district-owned computers, and so when they come to school, you know, we have, you know, malware detection in place, you know, virus detection and that type of thing also. So if they pick something else up at home, that would catch that. Also, students do not have rights to install things on their computers. Just because they don't have rights, that doesn't mean they don't try to. There's some of them, but we also, they're pretty limited in what they can actually install on the hardware that we provide for them.
Thank you very much.
Jamie.
Yeah, I was just wondering, so one of the things talking about the vendors and them alerting us, is that something that like would be written into policy or contracts when we're talking about, because I feel like that could then lead to like financial liability if there is a contract or policy that when a vendor enters into agreement with us that says you must notify us if this happens. So is that something that's like board level? Is that even beyond that? Do we have a policy that says anything at the moment that we know of?
So Coy, jump in if I missed something. I don't believe we have anything in policy for that right now. And my thinking is this, I don't know if it should necessarily be every vendor. I mean, a vendor that we spend, you know, $1,000 a year on, and they don't have any of our information, but a vendor that like some of our curriculum vendors that have all the student information, or a vendor that we spend a ton of money with, I think the agreements might need to be a little different. But Coy, please, we haven't dug into a lot of the details of this.
Yeah.
That's my original thinking is I think it'd be really tough to do something for every vendor we have. But.
Yeah, I agree, Shane. I think that's a good way to say that. And I think you asked some excellent questions, Mrs. Clapham. And I do think that from a legal standpoint, we're going to have to explore some of those at more depth. I agree with Shane. I think that obviously it would not be possible to execute that type of an agreement with every vendor, but certainly vendors that are falling above a certain level of dollar amount exchange per year, vendors that we are entering into agreements with, specific agreements, contractual agreements. I certainly believe that we could include clauses in those agreements which said that it is necessary that you make us aware of any breaches in your system, any cybersecurity threats that you're aware of, et cetera, et cetera. So certainly, like Shane said, an area we need to explore a little more in depth, both from the legal standpoint and the compliance standpoint, and see how we can make that happen.
Just to follow up with that real quick, then it wouldn't really necessarily be a policy change because that would be for all vendors basically. But we would see this change in the contracts or agreements.
That would be, to me, the way that we would want to roll it out, President Thomas. I think that it would be more effectual, because what we would probably have is a lot of vendors that say, well, I'm not bound by your policy, so I'm not going to release that information. Now, if we had it in an agreement, in a contract, and it was something that they were liable for, then certainly I think we would have more teeth. So yes, I would agree.
Okay, Mrs. Swaggart.
So I would say that we have a significant number of MOUs that could also be introduced into some of those with agencies and organizations that we share data or information with. I think that probably more realistically, this is going to have to be something that comes down an expectation, maybe that even insurance companies will require, because they certainly don't want to be liable to insure us if it's somebody else's mistake. So just to share, a few years ago, a couple years ago, I was a victim of identity theft. And, you know, you never know where that happens, but within a very short period of time, the organized crime syndicate that got a hold of my information chalked up $300,000 or $400,000 worth of different things. So it's something I'm very aware of and very, very concerned. The people who are doing this are not, you know, your neighbor down the street, but it's very organized groups of people that are literally after targets of big pots of money. And I remember thinking that in 7 to 10 days, they had basically built companies out of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if they did that with 10 people in 10 days, you know, we're looking at millions of dollars. And I just think it's something that we need to be very aware of. So Shane, I appreciate you pointing out that 47% of American adults have the ability to be victimized by that. I think that you make a good point about our data retention and destruction. It's astounding. You know, I think back over the 21 years I taught and the thousands of students that I came in contact with, and the fact that, you know, over the years that just grows. And so we have to be good partners with our good stewards of that information for our community. And so I do think that's something that we need to talk about. Shane, though, I'm going to be in huge trouble, but I don't think I've had a request to change my password in a long, long time. So
we don't require that. State doesn't require it. With the most, if you get a phishing email and you click on a link, we're going to require you to change it. What the state and we talked about this, and their recommendation is the length of the password is what matters. Changing it periodically doesn't really do much.
Well, I know we used to get one like every 6 months or something, and then year and a half ago or something, those just quit.
Yep, so we went from 8 to 12 characters. So
length of the password, that's good to know. That multi-factor authentication, you mentioned that it's just for certain employees. Is that true? It's just
correct. So the trick with multi-factor authentication is we started with the employees that had district cell phones, because you need a second method to identify. And most organizations, private and public, it's hard to tell someone to use their private phone. Now there are other methods. You can use a fob that has a 10 or 12 digit number that changes, but those are really hard to manage.
Yeah.
You know, so and that's something that, and we've been talking to the state, and they work and they support the schools on this stuff. And I didn't mention that earlier. And they're aware that we need a method to do this for more than ideally we'll be able to do it for all staff, but it's not feasible. I'd have to add a person just to manage fobs and take phone calls for people that can't type the numbers in on the fob. I mean, it would just be really tough. But we have most of our staff that have access to more than just like maybe a classroom's worth of data have cell phones. Or the gap I see right now is really clerical, because they see all school stuff. But
yeah, I think that multi-factor authentication is going out. I mean, I know, Coy, you mentioned that our insurance company wanted something like that in place. I know my bank has it, you know, credit card companies have it. I just think that that we maybe need to investigate pushing that out further, even if they don't have a district device. I just see the value in that. And then that human error piece, I just think the more, you know, we get a lot of pushback when we push out trainings, and yet when mistakes happen, they're oftentimes going to be boiling down to human error. I was just in a meeting today and somebody was talking about somebody they care about falling for a phishing email. And it's so accurate. I mean, I don't know how many times I get the Netflix one. I remember last weekend, my husband said, why is Netflix texting me? And he said, and what's this PayPal thing? I'm like, you don't have PayPal. So don't click on that. But it's just staying up to date on those things. They're so creative and crafty. And Shane and I were talking earlier, and one of the things that Shane said is they will even pretend to be employers for people who are hunting jobs. I mean, they just are, they're criminal minds. So they're thinking that way. And I just think we have a lot of smart people in our district. I think Shane and Coy, I'm so thankful that they're putting their heads together and moving forward with helping educate, because I don't think any employee that we work for wants to be that human error where that occurs. So thank you.
Mr. Sassy, did you want to respond to that?
Just very quickly, I think every single one of those things are great examples of the idea of the complexity of managing a situation like this, and looking at how we invest our resources the best way possible. And every single one of those, the multi-factor authentication. You heard Shane talk about the layers of management for that MFA. Even things like training, is we talked about a little bit at last week's board meeting. You approved the 60 training licenses for the KnowBe4 training system. As we roll that out, or if we roll that out, obviously we'll phase it out. We'll discuss that more. But as we roll out some type of a training system on a larger scale, that costs more money, that takes more resources to manage. So as we think and plan more for these things, again, those are going to be really important factors that we look at is how are we investing our resources? Are we going to move away from investing in the reactive side to the more proactive side? All those things are really important. So great examples.
Mr. Berklin.
Thank you. First thing I just want to say is thank you both for giving me a little bit more perspective on this. I also remember changing my password every 6 months and hating it. And now I understand a little bit more about why I need to do that. It's not just my password, it's the 150 students that I had at risk as well. So thank you for that. Mrs. Swigert actually asked a lot of the questions I was going to ask, but I did just want to also talk about the multi-factor authentication, because I do use that at my current job. And I really do appreciate that we're looking into that, because as annoying as it may seem, it's a relatively easy thing. And I'm just wondering, and I know there's costs, I know there's other security issues that come in with this. If we could just give an option of using your own thing or using a fob, because I love mine connects to my watch even. And then I think that's super nice to just pop it on my wrist. So some of our staff may very willingly use their own things. So thank you.
Shane, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and we talked about that also, because what I think would happen, we start handing out the keys. People are gonna not like to use the keys, and they kind of get, I don't want to say forced, but they're going to realize pretty quick it's much easier to use their own cell phone. So I think that would be an approach. And then there'd be some that just wouldn't use it. And then another piece with the email thing is I mean, right now all of our staff are set up with email, but I don't know if necessarily all of our employees need email either. So that's another piece also. Because and I touch on this with data, but I really want us to focus on what access do you really need? You know, and we do that now, but I think we can go to another level and get even more, granular about that. So.
Any other questions from our Zooms?
I would just say that maybe if we give the option to partner with us in that multi-factor authentication, and possibly if somebody isn't willing to do that, we really look at the access they have and do they need all of that? So I think that might be another thing. I don't want to get scammed ever again. So, so I would is it really, I love the fact that I have a district cell phone, so I did that. I really thought everybody was gonna do it. But I think let's send it out and see if it's not a cost. Let's send it out to see who would be willing, and can we push it out to the people who are willing? I guess would be my question there to the state. Because I think we'd be pleasantly surprised by the number of employees that would help us out with that. So, thank you.
I guess I would just make a final comment. I'm glad that you guys have brought this to us. I think it's extremely important, just like we do a check on our safety and security of our physical buildings for the safety of the students, especially, but also our staff. Obviously, they're connected to their computers. Their lives are connected to it. So that's really important to do too. So I'm glad you brought this forward and had this presentation. Thank you both.
Thank you, President Thomas.
Okay, we have an hour to other. Does anybody have any other? I'm not seeing Bishop Carr's hand, so I'm assuming no. All right. Yes. All right, we are at adjournment. I need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Roll call.
Kate,
Yes.
Troy. Troy for adjournment. Jim,
Yes.
Jamie,
Yes.
Michael.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
All right, thank you.